Hi everybody, welcome to the Daily Dose here at the Sewing Basket in Plymouth, Wisconsin. We are working on another project as always for you ladies. As we watch the news and say longer in, everybody's starting to run out of things. We're getting more and more calls. Thank you for that support. We appreciate that. But we also wanted to share with you a couple tips on some different things that you can use for projects when you're working at home. Today the Daily Dose buttons on the website will be this video. The second one will be how to make bias tape. And the third one is just a fun little Remember Grandma's button box as something to play with your grandkids or your kids on, a happy memory for most of us. What I'm going to talk about today is bias tape makers. Most of you already have these. You don't remember how to use them. Again, the second video today is the video on how to make the bias tape. So I'm not going to go through that here, but it's right on the Daily Dose page. When you use a bias tape maker, you cut a strip of fabric and it comes out like this. The two edges are folded over and clean edge, and the back side is your two raw edges. So it takes a strip of fabric, folds those edges in, and it pulls through and it gives you a finished edge piece. If you cut this on straight of grain, it gives you a nice straight piece. If you cut it on bias, this will nicely wrap around a curve. So that, again, will be covered in the other video. We're going to just talk about some projects. The first thing that these work great for, the pink one happens to be the 3/4 inch, which is the finished piece that I'm holding. This side, again, is unfinished. This side is finished. For those of you that are making masks, this is a really easy way. If you own one of these, fold it, make a strip of bias tape, fold it in half, and just stitch, and that is the tie for your mask. So it's a real easy way to do it. 3/4 inch works great. You can use the other ones. They get a little thin and thick, but they'll work really nice for masks. The other thing you can use bias tape for is pretty much anything you want to. We're going to talk about some different projects. The one that I'm holding here, or leaning against here, is one of Cheryl's Kaleidoscope quilts. These blocks were put together in rows, and then instead of sewing in a sashing, this is actually a 1-inch piece of bias tape just laid over the seam and sewn on either side. So all she did was make a lot of bias tape and cover up that seam.
It's quilt as you go.
And excuse me, thank you, Cheryl. It is also done quilt as you go, which is a technique that we teach. So that is actually covering the seam allowance. There's also bias tape on the back covering the seam allowance. So quilt as you go is a great way to use bias tape. The next projects we're going to just talk about, a lot of you make tote bags or market bags. This is black webbing, the 1-inch black webbing as the handle. You can either use the 1/2 or 3/4 inch bias tape maker, and what we did is we took one of the fabrics that matched the bag, happened to be the ruler, and we made bias tape and we just sewed it right over the webbing. And so that gives you a way to decorate that plain webbing handle and kind of fancy up your tote bags. This one is an oldie but a goodie. It's been around the shop for a while. You can see we used bias tape on the handles, both handles. The other thing we did was decorate it with bias tape. There's a lot of 1/2-inch bias tape here. This is a zipper pocket. The top of the zipper is actually covered with a piece of bias tape. So it's actually sealing the top of the pocket, holding the zipper in place, but it looks cute by having a piece of bias tape over it. Down here, the bottom of the pocket is also held by a piece of bias tape, just sewn over a raw seam, and then we added the webbing which closed the sides of the pockets. So you can use it in all different ways. On the back, this piece is just a decoration. This is just a pocket, and it was kind of plain and boring because this bag is kind of screaming. So I took a small piece of bias tape and just laid it across for decoration. Again, there's a piece covering the top of the zipper here, and that at the bottom of the pocket as well. On the inside, we have, if I can get the clasp open here, and I'll take out the little extra stuffing that we don't need and just throw that aside. On the inside, The bias tape holds all the pockets in. Hopefully you can see that. But all it is a piece of fabric with bias tape run down each side. You see that pretty well, Cheryl? Let me flip it inside out. Thanks to the cameraman there. Camera woman, excuse me. So this is just covering the raw edges. This was a square of fabric. I covered the raw edge with bias tape on either side, and this is covering the side seam of the pocket. So play with bias tape. You can use it for lots of different things. Those two patterns, the first one, the gray one, is just our basic tote pattern, and this one is our expandable travel tote pattern. Many of you have lots of patterns at home, but that's what we used them for. And projects you really don't need a pattern for, measure your favorite placemat so you know what size to make it. This has fusible batting inside. This is just a piece of a panel fused down with heat and bond, and then a little blanket stitch around it, and it was a little plain, so I took 2 pieces of bias tape. Again, just lay the bias tape over, sew down on either side, laid another one across. So you're just decorating with bias tape. And the last one is this little table runner. This was actually made with no piecing, none at all. I took a piece of fusible batting, and the snowmen are directional. So I took my piece of snowman fabric, I split it down the middle, and I put one snowman facing this way, one facing that way, so either side of the table the snowmen are upside right. And I just laid a piece of bias tape, actually 2. I put a red one down first, and then a thinner one over the top. This is actually covering the raw edge. These 2 pieces were not pieced together. They're just butted up to one another, and then the bias tape covers the seam. And then at the end, I took another piece of fabric. Again, these 2 fabrics were butted up, and I put a snowman from a panel. So there's no piecing on the top. It's a chunk of fabric, 2 chunks of snowman, 1 chunk of this, with bias tape laid over your seams. And that's all there is to it. So play with that bias tape. Go ahead and watch the how to make the bias tape video. It'll give you some really good tips on making it smooth and even. And that's all I have for today. So nice that you could join us. My cameraman had to go answer the phone, so I'm going to walk over and turn myself off. I hope you ladies and gentlemen have a great day. Thanks so much.